Teenagers don't often pay close attention to US congressional votes, but they may be doing that today because what's happening, about to happen in Washington is hugely important to that younger demographic. Next hour, the House of Representatives is set to vote on a bill that would force TikTok to divest itself of its Chinese ownership or be banned in the United States. Now, the legislation comes amid deep concerns about China's ability to access TikTok users' personal data and possibly use that to influence, for example, the November elections. Well, TikTok pushing back with a message encouraging users to contact their representatives and urge them to oppose this bill. Well, we are covering every angle of this story with Lauren Fox, who is on Capitol Hill. Mark Stewart is in Beijing, and Claire Duffy is in New York for us. Lauren, let's start with you. Why are so many lawmakers so exercised about this, so worried about TikTok?
Yeah, this has been building for a long time on the Hill, and their key concern is the national security implications of teenagers and Americans at large using this app. Many lawmakers don't use it themselves because of concerns about their data being shared with the Chinese government. The other concern that exists here is one of which some members who are voting against this bill say that they do not want to take away the freedom of users to operate this app. Now, I think that those two things exist in some ways, not in a vacuum, but lawmakers are going to be having this vote today on the House floor. It's going to require a 2/3 majority. They're bringing it under a suspension of the rules, which means it would have to get a huge number of bipartisan members, Republicans and Democrats, to back it. And leaders are very confident that they are going to be able to get there, despite the fact that there are some Democrats who are warning that this could have political implications for President Joe Biden when he tries to rally the youth vote to the polls. Here's what they said.
I don't think it'll be helpful with young voters, but you know, my argument here, yes, it has to do with young people, but taking a step back, I just think it's bad policy.
Successful politics is addition to multiplication, and cutting out a large group of young voters is not the best known strategy for re-election.
Now, President Joe Biden has said that he plans to sign this bill if it gets to his desk. But if the House can get it out of their chamber today, it then goes to the United States Senate. And the future is a little less certain over there. Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said yesterday at a press conference he was still looking at the bill, still thinking about the path forward. So a lot of questions on whether or not this is going to have a chance on the floor in the United States Senate. Becky?
Let me get to you then, Mark. Lauren, thank you. Let's get to Beijing. Mark, what are Chinese officials saying about this?
You know, it's interesting. We've heard a lot of talk between the United States and China lately about trying to create a competitive business relationship between the two nations. But then we have this lingering wound being TikTok. In fact, Becky, it was almost a year ago to the day that we were talking about a hearing involving TikTok. But the feeling from Beijing is really portraying the United States almost as a weak competitor in the global arena. Just a few hours ago here in Beijing, I talked to a spokesperson from China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I asked him, regardless of what happens with United States lawmakers, there is this feeling of distrust toward Chinese companies from American lawmakers, but also American citizens. Let's take a listen as to what he had to say.
Even though the U.S. has not found evidence on how TikTok endangers its national security, it has never stopped going after TikTok. Such practice of resorting to acts of bullying, when one could not succeed in fair competition, disrupts the normal operation of the market. It undermines the confidence of international investors and sabotages the global economic and trade order. This will eventually backfire on the U.S. itself.
I also asked the spokesperson, are you, being the Chinese government, are you advising TikTok on how to conduct itself, how to handle these hearings? But the response I got was pretty much the same response as you just heard, very much scripted. Becky, this is a story that's getting a lot of headlines in the United States, but not so much here in Beijing. It's not a big headline in the daily news cycle.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Let me bring in Claire, because I think our viewers will be interested to understand a little bit more about how this would work. I mean, clearly at this point, the effort is to try and get ByteDance, who is the Chinese tech giant that owns TikTok, to divest of its interest in what is this popular video app, or face a ban in the United States. Jake Sullivan explaining this is about basically, the US wanting American companies to own the data of American users, not the Chinese. How would a ban work, Claire?
Yeah, Becky, it's a good question because, I think you have ByteDance and TikTok signaling here that they are going to push back fiercely against this bill if it gets passed, signaling that they'll likely make a legal challenge to this bill. And so I think you're getting indications from that side that they're not necessarily interested in spinning off TikTok to a U.S. owner. I think there are also questions about whether you would have a willing U.S. buyer for TikTok. You have a lot of the major social media companies in the U.S. that are already facing regulatory pressure as potential monopolies. And so they're sort of limited in the acquisitions that they can make at this point. I think U.S. regulators would also push back on the idea of a Meta or a Google buying another major social media platform. And so I think there are challenges there in terms of what the spinoff would look like. And then we're looking at a ban, and this is a really politically fraught issue. You have TikTok users who are pushing back fiercely against the idea of a ban. I've watched a number of TikTok videos in the last few weeks, or the last week, I should say, of users filming themselves, calling their representatives saying, we're not going to vote for you in the next election if you vote to pass this bill. And so I think users are indeed really worried about the potential of a ban here. It's not necessarily all that easy to move your big following on one platform to another platform. And users are saying, particularly for users that are running small businesses that are making a livelihood on TikTok, TikTok says there are 5 million small businesses on its platform in the U.S. They're really worried about what this could mean for their livelihoods if the app is banned, Becky.
Can I bring Mark back in at this point? Because I think it's important that we look at what some, certainly many, are calling China's double standard here. Major US social media apps are banned in China, and there is a version of TikTok in China that looks very different. We've got an example of that. Have a listen.
And Douyin users under 14 can only use the app for 40 minutes a day and see kid-safe content.
Plus, Douyin automatically puts on this heavy beauty filter when I open up this camera function.
Point being here from Selena Wang's reporting is that kids in China who use this app or an app very similar to this are protected from the sort of awful content that so many in the States fear their children are exposed to on TikTok. Is there some hypocrisy in those bullying comments coming from Beijing today?
Well, I think the thing, Becky, is that the Douyin, the version that Selena highlighted, it is specifically made to a Chinese audience. I think the one point which should be taken into consideration, if you use this Chinese app of TikTok, again, made by ByteDance, it is censored in the sense if I were to type in Tiananmen Square 1989, referring to the political violence there from many decades ago, a sore point in Chinese history, that would not show up in the search engine. But if I went on TikTok, the United States version, the North American version, there's no censorship as to what can be seen. So I think in ByteDance's mind, they have this business strategy of making specific products for specific audiences. So that's something that I guess needs to be reconciled.